ANC National Executive Committee still in closed session discussing what options it should take to reach a coalition deal. You know how much conversation there is in our society about this. The party spokesperson said yesterday they were open to speak to anyone. She hinted at a government of national unity. The ANC also confirming Umkhonto we Sizwe has not responded to requests to discuss working together. We understand President Cyril Ramaphosa may deliver his closing address to this meeting in public. If that is the case, we'll bring that to you probably around 6 o'clock this evening. Professor Stephen Friedman is a Professor of Political Studies at the University of Johannesburg. Professor, good afternoon to you. I suppose, firstly, maybe we need to make this point. This is probably a position the ANC never wanted to be in. It says now it wants a government of national unity. Is that really a possible option at the moment?
Well, I doubt it, Stephen. It would in some ways be the fairest option. I mean, it obviously depends on how you do it, but if you do it in something resembling the way it was done in 1994, then parties would be represented in proportion to their vote. And that would be fairer than most of the other options that are available. But it doesn't seem to be a starter at all. I mean, the EFF has already said it's not interested. The DA has campaigned on its belief that the EFF and MK in government is a disaster, so it wouldn't be keen. MK doesn't seem to be keen on cooperating with anybody at the moment. So, you can't have a government of national unity if there's no national unity, and that seems to be where we are at the moment.
I mean, isn't that really our sort of political problem, that people have campaigned against each other so intensely and in a way that's driven maybe by the structure of our society as well? Now it's very difficult for anyone to do a deal without losing support. As Matthews Pauser put it yesterday, if the ANC works with the DA, it could kiss the local elections goodbye.
Well, I want to see the evidence for that. I mean, people are saying all sorts of things at the moment which are based on what pops into their heads rather than real evidence. But no, it's quite possible for parties who have fought with each other to make some sort of arrangement. I'm simply saying that if you want a government of national unity, you need the kind of spirit that there was in 1994, which is a spirit in which everybody says, look, we're on a new path here, we want to cooperate, etc. And that's not remotely where we are at the moment. So you really have to look at, what is possible where we are at the moment. And, I think what the politicians have to realize is the obvious point that, if they're trying to find some deal here which everybody's going to like, then they really are wasting their time, because there is no deal that everybody is going to like. There is going to be a deal which is going to offend a great many people, and they have to take a decision on which people they want to offend.
I mean, in some ways, I think this is being presented as a simple choice. The ANC can go to the left with MK. As you say, they're not responding to anyone's WhatsApp. Or maybe they could go to the left with the EFF. Or they could go to the right with the DA and maybe the IFP, depending on how you view these things. Those are really fundamental ideological, political choices. We have a very difficult history on some of these matters. I mean, would the ANC probably prefer to avoid making such a divisive choice? As you say, everyone wants to do something where everyone's happy. It's not going to happen.
It would want to do that, Stephen. But just before I answer that, just one point on that. One of the points that seems to be totally missing in the discussion, which is hugely important, is, it's move to the left, move to the right, etc. It's what is going to last for 5 years. And it seems to me that that's rather important. Now, MK in government is not going to happen for a variety of reasons. If you're talking about ANC, EFF, they don't have a majority. They're 3 seats short of a majority, and that means they would have to bring smaller parties in. And if they bring smaller parties in, you're in the situation where government for 5 years is dependent on a party which has got one seat or something like that. And I think that those issues will come into consideration. But beyond that, they will try to duck the issue. And it's not that easy to duck. I mean, the one proposal which is floating out there, which seems to me to have potential legs, if we can put it that way, is this minority government proposal. It's not something exotic. We had it in local government in Gauteng, both after the 2016 and after the 2021 elections. And it does at least enable both sides to say, or whoever's involved to say, well, look, we're not actually governing with them. We're doing something in the national interest. And in return, we're getting influence over what happens next, which seems to me about the most stable arrangement one can hope for in a situation like this.
I mean, isn't that why the DA, I mean, I think this is coming from the DA, it seemed to appear in the media on Sunday almost by magic. I mean, that's probably why this offer's on the table, because it's so obviously reasonable and it gets around maybe some of the difficulties of the ANC and the DA working together.
Well, I don't think one can assume that particular parties in this country have a monopoly on reasonableness. All of them are mostly unreasonable most of the time. The DA has its own issues, you see. I mean, the DA doesn't, the DA has spent the last 5 years telling people that the ANC is a disaster. It doesn't want to have to go back to all its branches and say, hi, folks, we're going into government with a disaster. So the reason the DA has come up with this proposal is that it suits the DA, because the DA can say, well, we didn't go into government with the ANC, but now we Parliament's agenda. Therefore, we are representing you. So it works for them. And I think we may. It's an option. It may have to decide that this is what works for it. Because you see, one of the things that's thrown the ANC entirely off course, and has thrown this entire process entirely off course, is that, contrary to what the ANC was saying on the hustings, they have been talking about coalitions for a while. But nobody expected an MK party with 14%. And what that has done is it's totally taken off the table an ANC-IFP coalition, which is a favorite in sections of the IFP. And as I said earlier, it's made an ANC-EFF coalition a lot more difficult than it might. So really what they're trying to do is, to recover from the shock that a lot of the options they thought were on the table aren't.
How do you see what Umkhonto we does next? And I realize MK says publicly that all of its decisions are made by one person, former President Jacob Zuma. Some speculation that perhaps MK won't actually take its seats in the National Assembly and the provincial legislature. And from my understanding of the law, the National Assembly can go ahead and actually elect a president. But I can't really see how the legislature in KwaZulu-Natal could meet without nearly half of its members.
No, I would assume you wouldn't have that. You'd have to battle for a quorum in KZN. My sense of the MK strategy at the moment is that they're not particularly interested in coalitions or arrangements, certainly outside KZN. Because what their people are saying is, well, basically, whatever is agreed on isn't going to work, and that will advantage them because they can trash the ANC for going into something which doesn't work. So if that's their mindset, they're really not going to be interested in anything that's on the table. Their problem is, do they want to be the absent opposition in a province in which they got 45% of the vote? Because if they do, I think they will find that a great many of the people who voted for them may decide that they made a mistake, which they're not going to repeat next time. So they're not, they talk as though, they get to decide what happens next. But I think they may find that if they do want to have some kind of traction in the future, they're going to have to participate because the people who voted for them will insist on them and will ditch them if they don't.
The risk of not actually having a coalition, I mean, we're supposed to, I would presume really the real deadline is probably Friday, but maybe legally next Sunday, Parliament needs to meet, MPs need to be sworn in at that meeting. The National Assembly is supposed to elect the president. Is there a risk that maybe that doesn't happen, or that the ANC just goes ahead and elects Ramaphosa without actually having the backing of other parties?
Well, the ANC cannot elect Ramaphosa without the backing of other parties, because if you look at the Constitution, it says that whoever's elected president has to have a majority of members of the National Assembly. So they can't elect Ramaphosa unless other parties agree to elect Ramaphosa. And we could very well, and I've been boring people about this for months, we could very well have a situation in which there isn't a president elected. Now, the question of what happens then is something I really think the politicians should have fixed up beforehand. Now, if you look at the Constitution, it says, and a lot of people are relying that, it says that the president remains the president until the new president is inaugurated. So you could interpret that to mean that we could go on for months with Mr. Ramaphosa as president. However, it also says that the term is 5 years, and the two seem to clash with each other. So if we have a situation where nobody is elected, I think the chances of this landing very quickly in the Constitutional Court are very high. So if that deadline is not met, my anticipation is what happens next is that they have to go to the Constitutional Court, and the court will decide what happens next. Either it will say that clause in the Constitution is binding and therefore this government remains in office until there's a new one, or it will have to put some other arrangement in place.
I mean, this is probably the worst kind of outcome, a mess that goes on for months because parties can't agree.
No, well, it is the worst. Well, it needn't be the worst kind of outcome, Stephen, because this is an issue, as I say, I've been on about for months, because one of the things that we're examining at the moment is that it's not that easy to form a coalition. You know, the example I always use is Germany. And the reason I use Germany as an example is that coalitions are virtually second nature in German politics. I can't remember, I don't think since World War II there's been a German government which wasn't a coalition. And yet, despite the fact that coalitions are second nature, after a German election, it can take 3 to 5 months to negotiate a coalition. We expect in a situation where it's totally new, where people have been yelling at each other, where the result is one that nobody expected, we're expecting all this to happen in 2 weeks. And it simply isn't realistic. So what I've been advocating for a long time, which unfortunately is not there, is that the parties should have agreed to change the Constitution to make it very clear what happens, so that we could go on for 3 or 4 months, and then the country is still governed. People understand that if you don't want the old group to be there governing the country, then you better reach an agreement so that they're not there anymore. But until we have that, then obviously you're going to have a lot of anxiety about the fact that there's nothing in place.
Professor Stephen Friedman, it's going to be an interesting few days, few weeks, and from what you say, probably an interesting few months. Thank you very much indeed, Professor Stephen Friedman, Professor of Political Studies at the University of Johannesburg. We're staying with politics, actually.